Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be pitting the Nikon ZR in Red Code RAW 6K versus the royalty of all cinema cameras, the Alexa Mini LF. Now, some of you might have seen the video I posted earlier this week, which was basically a scene with my friend Vanessa and I, set in a controlled lighting environment using both the Nikon ZR and the Alexa Mini LF. And I cut between both cameras randomly. In this video, we're going to reveal which camera was which, along with some other tests I did with the Nikon ZR and the Alexa Mini LF. And I will say, using these cameras next to each other, the results were pretty shocking. Let's jump into it. Now first, let's get into the comments of some of the videos and an Instagram post I did asking which camera was which. By the way, if you don't follow me on Instagram, go ahead and do so now. I'll put my handle below. I do tend to post more behind the scenes and additional content on that platform. So let's get this out of the way. Some of you guessed the right cameras for the right reasons. Some of you guessed the right camera for the wrong reasons, which we'll get into. And most of you, I would say about 75%, got it wrong. And we will get to the answer later in this video. But first, let's talk about why I did this test in the first place. So I actually owned the Alexa Mini LF. I had it here in Los Angeles, mostly co-signed with rental houses. I barely ever took it out. It was more of an investment. And for those of you that live in LA or follow the industry, it's not doing so hot right now. At least not in Los Angeles. So basically the camera just wasn't going out as much and I decided to sell it. During that transitional period, I had the camera here in my house for about 2 days. And I decided, hey, why not make a test comparing the Nikon ZR directly to one of the best cameras ever made, the Alexa Mini LF. It was more so just a test for me. I just wanted to see how the images were different. Instead of looking at charts and just hearing a bunch of numbers about the Nikon ZR, I wanted to see how it stacked up to one of the cameras that is definitely the best in dynamic range, color science, motion cadence, pretty much everything. As far as the purpose of this video, there kinda isn't one. I will say what this video is not. It is not saying your Nikon ZR can replace an Alexa Mini LF. And it's definitely not saying that the Nikon ZR can do anything the Mini LF can do. It's not even really an argument saying the Nikon ZR can be a B cam to the Mini LF. Although in certain settings, I think it can be. This video is really just an exploration about how far the gap has closed between budget-friendly cinema cameras and the best of the best. A roughly $2,000 camera against a $90,000 camera. Or at least it was $90,000 at the time that I purchased it. That is a very wide range, but it is also pretty shocking in showing us how capable a $2,000 camera really is. So let's jump into the footage. The first test I did was an overexposure test right here, blowing out this window behind me. I didn't use any lighting and I just exposed for myself. So both cameras are dealing with a pretty large amount of dynamic range, especially in the highlights. So let's take a couple minutes and just watch that footage. I'll put some nice music on, you can grab a coffee or another drink of your preference, and develop some opinions of your own before I jump into the footage and show you what I think. Next time you see me, I'll be at my desk and we'll dig into my thoughts on the footage. But for now, you can enjoy. See you soon. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed the footage and maybe you developed some opinions of your own. I'm gonna go through the looks right now and just kind of give my 2 cents. So first, let's pull up the log images. Now in their log state, they're actually kind of somewhat comparable. You will see an ongoing theme with the Alexa Mini LF, and that's basically that it looks brighter. Now this is very common for sensitive cameras with a lot of dynamic range. My VariCam LT actually behaved very similar to this. It's not so much that it's actually exposing brighter, but it's basically capturing more data in the dynamic range. And that's basically because the Mini LF just has more wiggle room in the shadows. There's a lot more dynamic range in this camera. And that really shouldn't surprise anybody. However, you can see the ZR still holds up pretty well. And we can also see here in the log image that the highlights outside, basically through the window, is pretty blown out on both cameras. We'll get to this more in the Rec 709 and the graded imagery, but basically the point is even the Alexa Mini LF has a limit. So let's go to the Rec 709. Now the Rec 709, this is straight out of camera. I just use color space transforms into DaVinci Intermediate Color Space, and then I output to Rec 709. So that's all that's going on here. I didn't touch up anything else. You can see here in the Alexa that the outside almost appears to have less detail, but that's really just how it's handling the Rec 709 LUT. We can bring a lot of that detail back. But mainly you can see here how they handle color differently. The Alexa is famously neutral and vibrant and just really beautiful skin tones and good color across the board. The ZR definitely has a more kind of greenish wash to it. And that's saying a lot because the Alexa Mini LF is also known for leaning a little bit green. So we can see here the ZR in Red Code RAW leans even more green. However, honestly, I don't mind it that much. In the past, certain cameras that would lean green, Sony mainly comes to mind before they introduced their Venice color science, it would affect the entire image. So skin tones would look pretty terrible, and the color blue would kind of present as more cyan. With the ZR, I don't really get that. It still maintains healthy skin tones and really nice blues and really nice reds. So it's better at separating the colors. But yes, the overall image does lean green. So now let's take a look at pulling those highlights back and grading these cameras to match a little more closely. All right, you can see here that we pulled a lot of detail out of those windows, surprisingly in both cameras. Now the color fidelity outside the window is better in the Mini LF. That's really where it shows its highlight strength. It maintains more of that data in the highlights. You can see in the ZR, the colors outside of the window just look slightly more washed out. But as far as shadow detail and everything else, I think the ZR holds up really well here. I did bump the shadows up in the ZR and I did add noise reduction. But with using raw footage, noise reduction is a pretty normal workflow. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of all I have to say about these images. They both look really nice. Last but not least, we can just play back and look at the motion cadence. They both look really great to me. The ZR has a really good readout time. If I'm really pixel peeping, I think the Alexa Mini LF does have a more filmic motion cadence, but the ZR comes pretty darn close, especially for that price point. I would still consider the ZR as a very cinematic looking image when it comes to motion cadence. I should also quickly mention everything in this video was shot on the Blazar Mantis 50mm at a 2.8, and all of the cameras had the exact same settings: ISO 800, 5600 Kelvin white balance, shutter angle of 180, shooting in the 16:9 format. The Alexa was shooting in ProRes, and the ZR was shooting in Red Code RAW. Normally, I would expose the ZR differently than other cameras, especially the Mini LF. But I wanted to see how close these come just straight out of the box, so I kept all the settings the exact same. And judging by that first setup, it looks like the ZR maybe has a little more wiggle room in the highlights than it does in the shadows. So the overall dynamic range of the ZR seems to shift a little more favorable in the highlights. That's just to my eye. But let's do our second test. In this test, I went outside and we point the cameras straight into the sun. It's more or less golden hour, and we can really see how these cameras handle their dynamic range, their shadow detail, and their highlight roll-off. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that footage for you so you can see it for yourself, and then we'll dig into it on here. And we're back. So first, let's look at the log images. In this first little setup, we can really take a look at the detail. So we're just gonna scrub through to when it's pointing at the sun, and we can see both these cameras maintain a really good amount of dynamic range. This is where you can really see the Alexa shine though. We're seeing a lot more of that sun. The ZR definitely blows the sun out sooner, but it does have a really nice highlight roll-off. As far as shadow detail goes, you can see a little more in the Mini LF, but again, the ZR does a really great job here. Let's go into the Rec 709 images. All right, here in the Rec 709 images, we can see that these are, again, pretty comparable. They both do an amazing job with highlight roll-off, and they both still have a ton of detail in the shadows. If we scroll back a little bit, I think this is where we can really see that green shift in the Nikon ZR, and it really comes out in the trees. Obviously, you can color grade both these images, but just straight out of camera, the greens really pop in those trees on the Nikon ZR, whereas the Alexa maintains just kind of a more neutral look with the color. You can also see it on the building right here. The sun hitting the building maintains a more magenta and kind of warm feeling in the Alexa, whereas the ZR, it kind of leans more yellow because of that green tint. So let's pull those highlights back and look at some graded footage. All right, now here in the graded footage, we can really see that highlight superpower that the Mini LF has. We are looking almost directly at the ball of the sun. And you can see around the sun, there's a lot of warmth and color fidelity there. Whereas in the ZR, it definitely kind of blows out. But again, I think it has a really pleasing roll-off, and there's still a pretty good amount of detail around the sun. And if we scrub back a little bit, we will see a little more color fidelity in the sky than the ZR, but it's really not by that much. So in those tests, basically what that told me is don't listen to charts and things when it comes to the Nikon ZR. This camera actually packs a pretty good amount of dynamic range. I wouldn't necessarily say it is close to the Alexa, because no camera really is, but I would say that it comes close enough that it shouldn't really limit what you're shooting. This camera is very capable of shooting golden hour shots straight into the sun and still maintaining a great amount of detail. Point being, if you're actually telling a story, people are not going to be looking at this type of thing. And that in the Mini LF, there might be a little more detail around the sun than if you shot with the Nikon ZR. Hopefully they'll be focusing on your subject and your story. And the ZR still does such a good job that those differences in dynamic range shouldn't really affect the way you shoot. All right, so those were our first few tests, but now we're gonna get to the chunky part. We're gonna take one more look at the scene I shot with my friend Vanessa, and we're gonna answer which camera was which. If you've seen the scene already, you can just skip past this part, and if you haven't seen it yet, we're gonna play it right now for you. I'll see you soon.
I just don't think you're giving me what I need anymore.
Here we go.
I'm serious. I need 14 stops.
14? Who needs 14 stops?
Apparently I do. And you're only giving me 13 and a half.
Oh. So now years later, 13 and a half isn't good enough.
Not with your highlight roll-off.
Oh my God, you said you'd work on your shadows.
I have worked on my shadows.
No, you haven't. You crushed them so much, it is black. There is nothing there.
Well, at least I have depth.
You spend all day protecting your highlights because you are too afraid to look in the dark.
Wow, okay. Well, at least I don't clip under pressure.
That was one time.
Oh, twice, and your mother was there.
Everybody clips.
Not in front of family.
You know what your problem is? You want everything. You want internal RAW. You want open gate. You want 12K recording. What's next? Medium format?
Are you mocking my dreams?
I'm not mocking your dreams. I'm just saying maybe you can achieve them with what you already have.
I just don't know if we're compatible anymore.
Because half a stop?
It's not about the stops.
What is it about?
I just don't feel seen.
Have you tried taking the lens cap off?
You're such an idiot.
You married me.
No, I updated your firmware.
Fair. Hey, you know, if you give me some prep time, I can do 14 stops.
Oh yeah? Prove it.
Okay, that was our scene, and now is the time some of you have been waiting for. I won't say all of you, because some of you just might not give a shit, and that's okay. I don't really either. But the answer is camera A was the Nikon ZR, and camera B was the Alexa Mini LF. Now those had a color grade on them. I wouldn't say a particularly heavy grade, but there was a decent amount of work done to get those cameras to match. And that actually took me quite some time until I ended up finding a very easy solution. But before we get into that, let's get into the log images. So here we have a log image pulled up. Now in these darker scenarios, we can really see what I was talking about earlier, that the Alexa Mini LF seemingly exposes a little brighter. Again, it's not necessarily brighter, it's just capturing more data in the shadows. That becomes very obvious on this shot of our subject. Straight out of camera, the log image in the Alexa just kind of pops more, whereas the ZR, it looks a little more washed out and a little darker. But these are log images, there's not really much to go off. So let's take a look at the Rec 709 straight out of camera using color space transforms. All right, so this is straight out of camera Rec 709 images. We can see there's actually some similarities between these, but here we can really see the ZR leaning into that green and yellowish territory. We can see that in the white of her shirt and on her skin. It seems to just pull more yellowish and green hues out of warmer colors, where the Alexa seems to maintain more magenta and accurate skin tones when it comes to warm colors. So straight out of camera, I definitely would prefer the Mini LF, but again, I don't think that should be a surprise. I also shot this scene using very warm color. It was something around 2700 Kelvin, and the cameras were set to 5600 Kelvin. I did want a warm look, but I didn't want it this warm. But I also was stress testing the sensor to see how much we could shift the colors in post. And while we're here, let's jump to another shot real quick and just look at the sharpness. Now we can see that the Nikon ZR is definitely a sharper camera. But again, I would not really use the word sharp. To me, it's just more detail. Now, if it did have a better or a different OLPF, it might be slightly more pleasing, but I honestly don't mind it. Whereas the Alexa does maintain kind of a softer filmic look to it. But still, I find both of these cameras very cinematic. I also was pulling focus manually here, so some of the loss of detail in the LF could simply just be because it was slightly out of focus. And last but not least, let's look at the final graded image. Let's talk quickly about how I got there. Now, when I was using the color space transforms, trying to get these cameras to match, it was really difficult. I just couldn't seem to get that yellowish tint out of the ZR, and I was having a really hard time. I just spent hours tinkering until I was so far down the rabbit hole, both the images just looked terrible. That being said, I'm not a professional colorist, so there's probably easier ways to do that kind of workflow. But the workflow I found ended up being the simplest and made these cameras match pretty quickly. Instead of using any color space transforms, I simply put the ARRI Rec 709 LUT onto the ARRI camera, and then I put the red film bias LUT in Rec 709 onto the Nikon camera. That alone got these cameras to match pretty quickly. So if you want a more Alexa looking image, the film bias LUT definitely helps. Then I used Dehancer, the film emulation plugin, and put a Kodak stock on both of the cameras. That with a little color temperature adjustment and some curve adjustment, and we were sitting in a pretty good place. Let's take a look. All right, so here's the final look, the one that you guys saw, and I would say the colors match pretty well. Grading it in post, I found the Alexa Mini LF to be a little bit more flexible, but the Nikon ZR still had a lot of wiggle room to play with the color. This scene was definitely more to test digging into the shadows of the Nikon ZR, and I think it did a pretty good job. Although I will say the shadows are where you might run into problems with the Nikon ZR before the highlights. They can definitely get noisy and kind of lose a lot of detail pretty fast. But I did expose these cameras exactly the same. If you watch my previous videos, I always say in scenarios like this, you want to expose the Nikon ZR about a stop or maybe even 2 stops over. And there's plenty of wiggle room to do that. This scene itself was probably working within, I would say 10 or less stops of dynamic range. And if you look at the Rec 709 color space, it only has about 8 stops of dynamic range anyway. So the ZR has plenty to work with. And if you have scenes with controlled lighting and you overexpose the ZR by 1 or 2 stops, you will be sitting in a really good place. I did apply noise reduction to the ZR on this scene, but if I expose like I normally would, 1 or 2 stops over, I don't think you would even need noise reduction. And there'd be plenty of room to bring everything back down and have a really nice clean looking image. All right, so that's that for the Nikon ZR and the Alexa Mini LF shootout, or whatever you want to call it. And again, this video was really just to show how much the gap has closed. When I was coming up, a $2,000 camera wouldn't even come close to touching this type of image quality. And now here we are cutting it with an Alexa Mini LF. And to my eye, it looks pretty good. Now in the video earlier this week, some of you did mention that the ZR looked digital and overly sharp and had bad motion cadence. All I can say to that is to each their own, but I respectfully disagree. This is coming off as someone with 10 years of experience as a DP in Los Angeles, who has worked with Academy Award nominated cinematographers, shot multiple feature films, and have used just about every single camera you can think of. And to my eye, the ZR still looks very filmic. I wouldn't say it's sharp, but it is a very resolute camera. And I think the motion cadence is about as best as you can get in this price range. Actually, just about everything the ZR does is the best you can get in that price range. I would even choose its image over cameras that are much more expensive than it. Except the Mini LF, because when you do play around with this footage, you really learn how special that sensor is. But I, for one, am super glad that that gap between image quality keeps closing. It just gives us filmmakers more options to make our movies. And that's what matters most, storytelling. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one.